Art style is an ever-present issue within the art community. Basically, every art YouTuber has at some point or another made a video about how to find your own. It seems to be one of the biggest concerns new artists have. And it makes sense. If you want to stand out from the crowd of other artists, having a unique art style is one of the most obvious ways to do so. But if you ask me, y'all are overthinking this. Hello, my name is Tim Naka, I make art and stuff. That has been the case for my entire life. It's kind of the cornerstone of my identity, aside from being the weird one. Naturally, this means my style has shifted a lot over the years, going from simple doodles to full-on anime. So how about I take you on a little journey through my art to see how I arrived at my current style, and maybe it'll help you worry less about finding yours. Now I think it's safe to say that we can ignore my earliest childhood drawings and skip to when I first developed something you could actually call an art style back in elementary school. That style being this. I tried digging up as much of my old art as I could, but a lot of it seems to be missing. Anyway, that first art style of mine slowly got refined, and by the time I was in high school, it looked like this. I mainly based the look on both Playmobil and Lego figures, but also, since I mainly drew on graph paper, I used the grid to get somewhat consistent proportions. You got one square for the head, one square for the torso, and one square for the legs. As a result, my art was pretty tiny, and the grid can be rather ugly. Also, those somewhat consistent proportions went out the window the moment I drew outside of a grid. Besides people, I also drew a bunch of random creatures. Those didn't follow the grid as much, and so were allowed more freedom and variety. I also drew a bunch of maps. They don't really factor into the overall topic of the video, but I just wanted to highlight them here. With my early style established, we arrive at my first major milestone, Dungle. This was during a time where I became obsessed with the subspace emissary from Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and so obviously I had to make my own version in the form of a comic. Except instead of Nintendo icons, I put together my own cast. We got a stick figure, pirates, Bionicle, Indiana Jones, random animals, Super Mario, Alien vs Predator, racial stereotypes, and Squid. Remember the Squid, he'll be important later. As for the actual comic, while I still look back on it very fondly, it's kinda bad. But in an endearing sort of way. I'll probably do a whole video just about Dungle and its legacy, so I won't dwell on it too long. Around this time I also stumbled upon the concept of Pokémon sprite edits. This was mind-blowing to young me who had always wanted to make his own Pokémon, so I began messing around in MS Paint. Unfortunately, I would eventually delete all of my sprite edits, so sadly I can't share any of them here. But the important part is that I was now able to do simple pixel art. And so I used my new skills to recreate the pygmies from Pocket God? Okay, but after that I began recreating my art style in pixel form. Using a Pichu as a base, I created this simple template that would serve as the basis for most characters. At first, the pixel art went hand in hand with my traditional art. I would draw characters on paper and then recreate them in MS Paint. As time went on, however, I drew less and less traditionally and almost exclusively made pixel art. Because it was just way more convenient. The sizes and shapes are always consistent, I can just copy stuff over, coloring is instant thanks to the bucket tool, and I can erase things without the risk of creating an ugly smudge that ruins everything. Over the course of what I'll call my pixel era, I attempted various fun projects. Early on I made these little animated shorts, but since I didn't know how to do walk cycle, the characters are just awkwardly hopping around. Then there was that time I tried recreating every Warhammer Fantasy unit. I never completed that, but I did get most of them done. My most ambitious pixel art project, however, was when I tried making a game in RPG Maker, featuring the squid from Dungle. See, I told you that he was gonna be important later. I spent several years working on this game and even released a demo at some point. But I eventually got annoyed by RPG Maker's limitations, and after a failed attempt to port it to Game Maker, I decided to cancel the game. So now I'm just kinda sitting on over 400 unused enemy sprites. While the pixel era was fun, in hindsight I also feel like it kinda stunted my artistic growth a bit. Don't get me wrong, pixel art is great and people do amazing things with it. But in my case I used it as an excuse to avoid learning. I never did any shading, there was minimal variation in terms of poses, and everybody had the exact same body type and face. At the same time, I became increasingly frustrated with the limitations of pixel art, especially when compared to drawing traditionally. I said earlier that after starting with pixel art, I eventually stopped drawing on paper, but that's not entirely true. Throughout school, whenever I got bored of taking notes, I would doodle on the back of my notebook. There was little rhyme or reason to these doodles, they were just whatever I was currently thinking about, and frequently evolved into these indecipherable masses of creativity. The freedom these allowed me was a stark contrast to the rigidness of my pixel art. So this was my dilemma. I wanted to draw as freely as I did on paper, but with the advantages of pixel art. The obvious solution to this was of course to get a drawing tablet. But for whatever reason, I just refused to get one. I guess I was just stubborn and scared of new things. But also, a drawing tablet is a big investment, so what if I get one and then don't like using it? So instead of just getting a tablet, I took a rather convoluted approach. I would draw a sketch on paper, scan it to my PC, and then painstakingly trace the sketch with my mouse before coloring it. It was not ideal, to put it lightly. Luckily, I didn't have to torture myself with this method for too long, because a major change was on the horizon, one that would shift the direction of my art forever. VTubers. I love VTubers. I especially love Ina, so much so that I made a whole video about her. And it is because of Ina that in early 2021 I would finally get over myself and buy that long overdue drawing tablet. Now there was nothing left to prevent me from becoming the amazing artist I've always wanted to become. Except I had no idea what I was doing. Learning a new medium is always tricky, and so my first couple digital drawings were a bit wonky, because I was still figuring things out. Which brushes do I use? What size should my canvas be? How does shading work? I had to essentially reinvent my entire drawing process. At first I tried translating my old style over, which worked to some extent, but I was no longer satisfied with only drawing Playmobil people, because I had a new goal, one that I couldn't realize while bound to the confines of paper and pixels, and that goal was to draw cute anime girls. I didn't get into anime until I was in university, so I skipped the how to draw anime phase that most artists seem to go through during their teenage years, which means I had to catch up on that. Now, if you look at my style at the time, and the style I wanted to achieve, you can see there's quite a few hurdles to overcome. Turns out, a number of things I considered to be stylistic choices were in fact just me being lazy. What followed was a bunch of practice and experimentation. Eyes were one of my main priorities. I went through several iterations before arriving at the current look, and even then I still tweak it sometimes. Face shape was another major aspect. I did try the circle thing with the lines to get everything to line up correctly, but in the end I decided to just eyeball it, and that mostly works. For noses, I resorted to a simple black dot with a white highlight. Ears are something I still avoid for the most part. I think I'm decent at drawing them, but I just prefer hiding them behind the hair instead. As for hands, I still don't know how to draw hands. Sometimes they turn out fine, other times they just don't. About a year and a half after getting my tablet, I had mostly gotten the hang of drawing anime girls, though I didn't really have a consistent process yet. Around that time, I also started using 3D models to help me with anatomy and poses. While they were helpful for a bit, I eventually stopped using them. I had gotten good enough at basic anatomy, and the realistic proportions of the models started throwing me off a bit. I still use them for hands sometimes though. So this is where we leave 2022. It was definitely a learning period more than anything, but it did bring forth some works that I'm still very happy with. Entering 2023, this is where I truly feel like my current style materialized. I now had a well-defined process for drawing that I would always stick to, except sometimes when I forget a step and then wonder why the art looks off. I turned out banger after banger throughout 2023. It was just a great year for my art. And that's basically where I'm still at. 2024 saw a couple minor tweaks, because your art style never stops evolving and every piece will be slightly different, but none of them are that noteworthy, I think. Now I've mostly focused on how I draw people, because that's easier to track, but I do still draw creatures too. They're mostly limited to just doodles I do for fun on the side, rather than the full illustrations I share online, but I do want to give them more focus eventually. I also still do pixel art sometimes, like this Dwarf Fortress mod I made based on The Future is Wild. So, what do we take away from this? You may have noticed something throughout this video. At no point did I ever worry about finding my style. I just drew in a way that I enjoy. Sure, there were times where I felt like changing the way I draw, be that because I wanted to improve, change to a new medium, or found new interests. How you draw is not important. What matters is whether you have fun doing so. I hope this was helpful, or at least interesting. Bye! So this was originally going to be a sort of introduction to my channel, but while writing the script it just turned into a video about art style instead. I'm not entirely sure yet what to do with this channel. I have a couple ideas for future videos, so if you wanna see those, like and subscribe, I guess.